never thought I'd be the kind of person to do something like this. But maybe that's what everyone thinks before it happens. It wasn't planned. It wasn't something I sought out. Just happened. And now I can't stop replaying it in my mind. Lately, things between me and my husband have been distant. Not in a dramatic, screaming matches kind of way. More like an unsettling quiet. A growing space between us that neither of us seemed willing to acknowledge. He worked late. I went to bed early. Conversations were surface level. How was your day? Fine. Dinner's in the fridge. That kind of thing. I told myself it was normal, just a phase. But deep down I knew something was missing. And then there was him. He wasn't some stranger. I had known him for a while. A friend of a friend, someone I saw occasionally at gatherings. We'd always gotten along. Easy conversation, a few harmless jokes. But lately, his attention had shifted. It was subtle at first. Holding eye contact a second too long. A hand resting on my back as he passed by. Compliments that felt a little too personal. I should have ignored it. I should have walked away. But I didn't. The night it happened, my husband was away on a business trip. He had barely said goodbye before leaving. No kiss, no lingering touch. Just a nod and a "see you in a few days." I told myself I didn't care. But an hour later, when I got a message from him, the other man, I responded faster than I should have. "Hey, you home alone?" "Yeah," I typed back. "Mind some company?" I stared at the screen. Every logical part of me screamed no. But my fingers typed something else. "Sure." 15 minutes later, he was at my door. I opened it, and for a moment we just stood there. I could feel the tension between us. The kind that made my stomach tighten and my heart beat just a little too fast. He smiled easy, confident. Like he knew exactly what he was doing. "You looked like you could use some company," he said, stepping inside. I nodded, unable to find my voice. We sat on the couch talking at first. Small talk, meaningless words. But the space between us grew smaller. His knee brushed against mine. His fingers traced the rim of his glass as he spoke, and I found myself watching them, wondering. I don't know who made the first move. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was him. But suddenly, his hand was on my thigh, warm and steady. I should have pulled away. Instead, I exhaled, my body betraying me. "You okay?" he asked, voice low. I nodded again. And that was all the permission he needed. I could have stopped it. I had every opportunity to pull away, to stand up, to say this was a mistake. But I didn't. I sat there, letting his hand rest on my thigh, feeling the warmth of his touch seep into my skin like a slow burn. My breath hitched and he noticed. "You want me to leave?" he asked, voice low, controlled. I should have said yes. Instead, I shook my head. He leaned in just enough for me to feel the heat of his breath against my skin. "I don't want to do anything you don't want," he murmured. The words should have snapped me out of it. Instead, they unraveled something in me. A tension I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for months, maybe longer. It wasn't just about attraction. It was about being seen, being wanted, feeling something again. I swallowed hard. "I don't know what I want." His fingers traced a slow line up my arm, barely touching, just enough to send a shiver through me. "I think you do." My body answered before my mind could catch up. A tilt of my head, a parting of my lips. That was all it took. His hand slid up my neck, fingers threading into my hair as he pulled me in. The first brush of his lips was tentative, as if waiting for me to push him away. I didn't. The second kiss wasn't tentative. It was hungry, deliberate. A quiet understanding passing between us. This wasn't just about physical attraction. It was about something deeper. A need neither of us wanted to name. His hands moved over me with a slow, aching reverence, like he was memorizing every inch. My breath hitched as his fingers traced the curve of my waist, my hip, lingering just enough to make me shiver. Every touch sent a rush of adrenaline through me, a mix of anticipation and fear. "This is dangerous," I whispered, my voice barely audible. His lips hovered near my ear. Then why does it feel so right? That question would haunt me later. But in that moment, I didn't have an answer. Or maybe I did, and I just didn't want to admit it. The air between us grew heavier, the space non-existent. Every move felt inevitable, like we had passed a point of no return. I knew what was about to happen, and I knew I should stop it. But when his lips trailed down my neck, when his hands tightened around my waist, all I could think about was how badly I wanted to drown in this feeling. A small voice in my head whispered a warning. This was a mistake. A beautiful, intoxicating mistake. But it was too late. I had already decided. The moment his lips met mine again, everything else disappeared. No thoughts of consequences, no guilt, just the feeling of his hands gripping my waist, pulling me closer. My pulse pounded in my ears, drowning out every logical thought I should have been having. His touch was different. Not rushed, not careless. It was deliberate, like he was savoring every second, like he had wanted this for as long as I had. His fingers skimmed the small of my back, sending a slow, deliberate shiver up my spine. I let my head fall back, eyes fluttering shut as his lips traced the edge of my jaw. "Tell me to stop," he murmured against my skin. I didn't. Instead, my hands found his shoulders, then his chest, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breath beneath my fingertips. My body betrayed every ounce of restraint I had left, pressing against him, silently asking for more. He understood. His hands moved over me with a confidence that made my breath hitch, a slow exploration that sent heat pooling in my stomach. Every touch, every glance, felt like a quiet promise. He knew exactly what he was doing, and I let him. I wanted him to. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew this was crossing a line I couldn't uncross. I knew what this meant, what this would do to me. But when his hands tightened on my hips, when his mouth found mine again, all I could feel was the undeniable pull of something I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't thinking about my husband. I wasn't thinking about anything except the way he looked at me, like I was the only thing that mattered, like I was something to be cherished, not just tolerated. And that realization shattered me. His breath was unsteady now, his grip firmer, as if he could feel my resolve slipping. I felt his fingers trail up my arm, his touch leaving goosebumps in its wake. "You sure?" he asked, voice low, rough. He nodded. No hesitation this time. His hands moved with purpose, his lips brushing over mine one last time before everything blurred together. Heat, breath, the intoxicating weight of his body against mine. Every kiss, every touch, burned away whatever doubts I had left. Time didn't exist in that moment. There was only him, only this, only the sound of my own heartbeat hammering in my chest. I felt weightless, consumed. And for the first time in a long time I felt wanted. Completely, devastatingly wanted. And then it was over. The air around us was thick, the silence heavier than it had been before. His fingers traced small circles on my wrist, a lingering touch that sent a dull ache through me. I swallowed hard, suddenly aware of reality creeping back in. I didn't regret it. That scared me more than anything. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my breathing still uneven. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on me, but not in the way I expected. There was no immediate guilt, no instant regret. Just a quiet stillness, as if my body was waiting for my mind to catch up. He was beside me, his fingers absent-mindedly tracing the inside of my wrist. Neither of us spoke. Maybe he was waiting for me to say something, to acknowledge the shift between us. Maybe he knew that if we spoke, the spell would break. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I flinched, the sound cutting through the heavy silence. My heart pounded as I reached for it. My husband's name flashed on the screen. "Are you okay?" he had texted. My stomach twisted. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, but I didn't know what to say. The irony of it all, him checking in while I was lying in another man's arms, made my throat tighten. I swallowed hard and typed back, "I'm fine." It wasn't a lie. But it wasn't the truth either. Beside me he shifted, propping himself up on one elbow. You okay? I turned my head to look at him. His expression was unreadable. His eyes searching mine for something. Regret, hesitation, maybe even permission to do this again. I don't know, I admitted. He reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. The tenderness in the gesture made my chest ache. I don't want this to be a mistake, he said. I let out a slow breath. But it is, isn't it? He didn't answer. Maybe because we both knew the truth. This wasn't just some careless fling. It meant something. And that made it dangerous. I sat up, pulling the sheet around me like it could somehow shield me from reality. I should go. You don't have to. But I did. I had a life outside this room, outside this moment. A husband waiting for me to respond to his texts. A version of myself that, just hours ago, had never crossed this line. I stood, feeling the weight of his gaze on me as I dressed. He didn't try to stop me. Didn't ask me to stay. Maybe he knew it had to end here. Or maybe he was just giving me space to decide what came next. As I reached for the door, I hesitated. Turned back. He was still watching me, his expression unreadable. I wanted to say something, but what? That I didn't regret it. That I might regret it tomorrow. That if he called me again, I wasn't sure I'd have the strength to say no. Instead, I just nodded. Silent goodbye. And then I walked out, not knowing if I was leaving him behind, or a part of myself.